Owen's eyes snapped open at 3 in the morning. A stranger sat in the chair across from his bed, soaked through, trembling, clutching a small backpack like a lifeline. Rain hammered against the window. She looked up, met his stare without flinching. "I'm just staying here for one night," she said, voice steady despite the water dripping from her hair onto his floor. Not an apology, not an explanation, just a statement, as if she had every right to be there in the dark. Owen's hand moved toward his phone, then stopped. Something in her eyes, exhausted but not defeated, desperate but not dangerous, held him frozen. His 7-year-old son slept 2 doors down. Every instinct screamed to throw her out, but the way she gripped that backpack, like it contained everything she owned in this world, reminded him of something he'd buried 3 years ago. The feeling of having nowhere left to run. He should have called the police, should have protected what little peace he'd built. Instead, he heard himself say the words that would unravel everything. One night, that's all. He didn't know it yet, but she wasn't running from something. She was running toward the choice that would cost her everything, or save them both. The apartment was silent except for the rain. Owen sat up slowly, keeping his eyes on the woman. She didn't move from the chair, just watched him with that strange calmness that didn't match her soaked clothes or the exhaustion carved into her face. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe early 30s. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles around her shoulders. The backpack in her lap looked expensive, out of place against her wrinkled blouse and mud-stained jeans. "The Airbnb host gave me the wrong address," she said quietly. Her voice had an odd quality to it, refined in a way that didn't belong in his working-class neighborhood. "My phone died 2 blocks from here. I saw your light on and thought—" She paused, seemed to reconsider whatever she'd been about to say. "I knocked. You didn't answer. The door was unlocked." Owen's jaw tightened. He never left the door unlocked. Never. Not since Stephanie had walked out 3 years ago, leaving nothing but a note on the kitchen counter and a 7-year-old boy who kept asking when Mommy was coming home. He'd learned to be careful after that, to protect what little they had left. Yet here was this stranger, sitting in his bedroom like she belonged there, and all he could think about was how she'd said, "one night," as if she were asking for something small, as if one night couldn't change everything. "You can't stay here," he said, but the words came out wrong. Too soft, too uncertain. She nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer. "I know. I'm sorry, I need a few hours. Until morning. Then I'll be gone." Her fingers tightened around the backpack straps. "Please, I wouldn't ask if I had anywhere else to go." Owen recognized that look. He'd worn it himself once, standing in the hospital parking lot with Henry wrapped in a blanket, realizing his wife wasn't coming back. The look of someone who'd run out of options and was down to their last prayer. He stood up, grabbed a towel from the closet, and tossed it to her. "The couch. 6 hours. Then you're out." He didn't wait for her response, just walked to Henry's room and checked on his son. The boy slept peacefully, one arm wrapped around his stuffed bear. Owen pulled the blanket up to his chin and closed the door most of the way, leaving it cracked like he always did. When he returned to the living room, the woman had moved to the couch. She'd taken off her wet jacket and shoes, placing them carefully by the door. The towel was wrapped around her shoulders, but she was still shivering. Owen grabbed the spare blanket from the hall closet and dropped it on the arm of the couch. "There's a bathroom down the hall if you need it." "Thank you." She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something like vulnerability in her expression. "I'm Rachel." He almost told her his name, then stopped himself. Names made things personal. Personal meant connections, and connections meant risk. But she was already looking at him expectantly, and he found himself saying, "Owen." Then he turned and walked back to his bedroom before he could say anything else. before he could ask why a woman with an expensive backpack and a voice like money was sleeping on his worn-out couch, before he could wonder what she was really running from. The next morning came too fast. Owen woke to the smell of coffee and something else. Eggs, maybe. He stumbled out of his room, still half asleep, and stopped in the doorway of the kitchen. Rachel stood at his stove, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, wearing the same wrinkled clothes from the night before. She'd found his coffee maker, his eggs, even the bread he'd been meaning to use before it went stale. The table was set for two. She turned when she heard him, offered a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I thought it was the least I could do," she said, gesturing toward the food. "For letting me stay." Owen opened his mouth to tell her she didn't need to do this, that she should just leave like they'd agreed. But then Henry appeared in the hallway, rubbing his eyes and staring at Rachel with open curiosity. "Dad? Who's that?" Rachel's expression softened immediately. She crouched down to Henry's level, that expensive-looking backpack still sitting by the front door like a reminder that she didn't belong here. "Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm a friend of your dad's." The lie came easily. Too easily. "I stopped by early to drop something off." Henry looked between them, then seemed to accept this explanation with the simple trust only children possessed. "Did you make breakfast? It smells good." "I did. Are you hungry?" The boy nodded enthusiastically and climbed into his usual chair at the table. Owen watched this exchange, feeling like he'd lost control of his own morning. He should stop this. Should remind Rachel that her 6 hours were up, that she needed to leave before Henry got attached to another person who wouldn't stay. But Rachel was already serving his son eggs and toast, asking him about school, and Henry was talking more than he had in weeks. The apartment felt different with her in it. Warmer somehow, despite the grey morning light filtering through the windows. Owen poured himself coffee and sat down. "Where were you planning to go after you left here?" Rachel's hand stilled for just a moment. "I'm not sure yet. I was going to figure that out this morning." She glanced at the window, where rain still streaked the glass. The storm hadn't let up overnight. "Maybe find a hotel, or another Airbnb that actually exists." "In this weather?" Owen took a sip of his coffee. It was better than he usually made it. "Everything nearby will be booked. There's a convention in town." She absorbed this information with a slight nod, like it was just another problem on a long list she was working through. Henry was telling her about his favorite dinosaur, and she listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made the boy's face light up. Owen found himself studying her, the way she held her fork, the careful way she spoke, the occasional wince when she shifted positions like her body hurt. She didn't fit here. That much was obvious. But she was trying to, and that bothered him more than if she'd been openly disdainful of his cramped apartment and second-hand furniture. "I should get going," Rachel said after breakfast, standing up to clear the plates. "Thank you again for—" Henry's glass of water tipped over, flooding across the table and directly onto Rachel's backpack before anyone could react. The boy's eyes went wide with horror. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry!" Rachel grabbed the backpack, unzipped it quickly. Owen caught a glimpse of what was inside, sketchbooks, their pages already beginning to curl from the water. She pulled them out carefully, spreading them on the counter. One fell open to a half-finished drawing of a city skyline, another to a portrait of someone Owen didn't recognize. They were good, really good. The kind of art you saw in galleries, not on the counter of a carpenter's apartment. "It's okay," Rachel was saying to Henry, even as she tried to save the drawings. "Accidents happen. It's not your fault." But Henry was already crying, the way he did when he thought he'd done something terrible. Owen moved to comfort his son, but Rachel beat him to it. She knelt down and took Henry's hands in hers. "Hey, look at me. These are just drawings. I can make more. But I can't replace a morning with a friend who knows so much about dinosaurs. Deal?" Henry sniffled and nodded. Rachel smiled at him, a real smile this time, and Owen felt something shift in his chest. a crack in the wall he'd spent 3 years building. He looked at the ruined drawings, at Rachel's patient expression, at his son's tears drying up. Then he heard himself making an offer that had nothing to do with logic, and everything to do with the way Henry was already looking at this stranger like she might stay. "I have to work today. Big project deadline." The words came out before he could stop them. "My usual babysitter is sick. If you needed a place to stay for a few more days, you could watch Henry after school, just until you figure out your next move." He couldn't believe he was saying this. Couldn't believe he was inviting more risk into their carefully controlled life. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. "Are you sure?" No, he wasn't sure at all. But Henry was looking at him hopefully, and those ruined drawings were still spread across his counter, and Rachel had made his son smile for the first time in what felt like forever. "A few days," Owen repeated. "That's all. Just a few days," Rachel agreed. But the way she said it, the slight tremor in her voice, suggested she was lying to herself as much as to him. The first week passed in a blur of small adjustments. Rachel picked Henry up from school each afternoon, helped him with homework at the kitchen table, and always had dinner started by the time Owen got home from the construction site. She never asked for anything, never complained about sleeping on the couch or sharing the tiny bathroom. She just fit herself into the gaps in their routine like she'd been doing it all her life. Owen told himself it was temporary, that she'd leave as soon as she found something better. But she never mentioned leaving, and he never brought it up. He learned things about her in fragments. She was an artist. That much was obvious from the sketchbooks that were slowly recovering from their water damage. She'd grown up somewhere else, somewhere that taught you to say pardon instead of what, and to hold your fork a certain way. She flinched whenever her phone buzzed, which it did constantly, though she never answered it. She had nightmares sometimes. Owen heard her crying softly on the couch late at night, but he never asked about it. That would make it personal. That would make it real. Henry, on the other hand, had no such reservations. He attached himself to Rachel with the wholehearted devotion of a 7-year-old who'd been missing something he couldn't name. She taught him to draw, spent hours on the floor with him creating elaborate dinosaur scenes in crayon. She read to him before bed, a job Owen had been failing at lately, too tired from work to do more than kiss his son goodnight. She remembered which stories were his favorites, which toys went where, how he liked his sandwiches cut. Small things. Meaningless things. Except they weren't meaningless at all. One evening, Owen came home to find Rachel fixing the wobbly kitchen chair he'd been meaning to get to for months. She had his tools spread out on the floor, was working with a confidence that surprised him. "My father believed everyone should know basic carpentry," she said when she noticed him watching. "He said it builds character. Your father sounds practical." He was a lot of things. Rachel tightened the last screw and tested the chair. Solid. Practical was one of them. There was something bitter in her voice, something that suggested practical wasn't entirely a compliment. She put the tools away carefully, in exactly the right spots, like she'd been watching where Owen kept them. "You're good at this," he said. "I'm good at a lot of things I never wanted to be good at." She stood up, brushed off her jeans. "Dinner's in the oven. Henry's doing his reading. I should—" She gestured vaguely toward the living room, toward the couch that had become her territory. But Owen didn't want her to go yet. "Why are you really here, Rachel?" She went very still. "I told you. Wrong address. Dead phone." "That was 2 weeks ago. You could have left by now. Found a real place to stay. Would you like me to leave?" She met his eyes directly, challenging him to be honest. Owen thought about coming home to an empty apartment again, thought about Henry's face when he realized Rachel was gone, thought about eating dinner alone while his son asked where Miss Rachel went and why everyone always left. "No," he admitted, "but I don't understand why you'd want to stay." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but the sky was still grey and heavy with the promise of more. "Maybe I'm tired of running toward the things I'm supposed to want. Maybe I'm trying to figure out what I actually want instead." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Your life. It's simple. Real. Henry asks me about my day and actually wants to know the answer. You say thank you when I make coffee. Nobody's trying to turn me into something I'm not." Her voice cracked slightly. "I know this isn't permanent. I know I don't belong here, but for now, can't it just be enough that I want to stay?" Owen didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that he understood exactly what she meant, because he'd felt the same way 3 years ago when Stephanie left. She'd wanted more money, more excitement, more everything, and he'd just wanted this: a home, a son, something steady and true. But Stephanie had seen it as settling, and eventually she'd stopped pretending otherwise. "You can stay," he said finally, "as long as you need." Rachel's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you." That night, Owen lay in bed listening to the sounds of his apartment. Rachel moving around quietly in the living room, the old pipes groaning, Henry's soft breathing from the next room, normal sounds, safe sounds. And for the first time in 3 years, he let himself imagine that maybe this could last, that maybe not everyone left. He was wrong, of course, but he didn't know that yet. The crack in their carefully maintained routine came on a Tuesday. Owen was working on a custom cabinet job, running behind schedule because the wood had come in warped. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Henry's running a fever. Took him home early. He's asking for you." Owen swore under his breath, told his boss he had to leave, and drove home faster than he should have. He found Henry wrapped in blankets on the couch, flushed and miserable, with Rachel sitting beside him holding a damp cloth to his forehead. "How high?" Owen asked, already reaching for his son. 102. I gave him medicine 30 minutes ago." Rachel moved aside to let Owen sit down. "He threw up once, but nothing since then." Owen pressed his hand to Henry's forehead. Too hot. The boy opened his eyes and tried to smile. "Hi, Dad. I don't feel good." "I know, buddy. We're going to make you better, okay?" Owen looked at Rachel. "There's a clinic down the street. Can you—" "I'll get his shoes and a clean shirt." She was already moving, already knowing what needed to be done. They worked together like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. Rachel grabbed Henry's favorite bear while Owen carried his son to the car. She sat in the back with the boy, keeping him calm while Owen drove. At the clinic, she handled the paperwork while Owen stayed with Henry. When the doctor said it was just a virus and would pass in a few days, Rachel was the one who asked about warning signs and medication schedules. They brought Henry home and settled him in bed. Owen sat with him until he fell asleep, then found Rachel in the kitchen making soup from scratch. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I wanted to." She stirred the pot slowly, not looking at him. "He scared me today. When he said he felt dizzy, I thought—" She stopped, took a breath. "I'm not used to caring about people this much, to having it matter if they're okay." Owen moved closer, close enough to see the tension in her shoulders. "What kind of life were you living before this?" Rachel set down the spoon. "The kind where people hired someone else to check on their children, where caring too much was seen as weakness." She finally looked at him. "I was engaged, Owen, to a man my family chose. Preston. He's successful, from the right background, says all the right things. On paper, he's perfect." "On paper," Owen repeated. "In reality, he's cold, calculated. He looked at me the way you'd look at a business acquisition. Something to possess, not someone to love. She wrapped her arms around herself. The wedding was supposed to be 3 weeks ago. I made it to the church, walked halfway down the aisle, and just stopped. I realized I couldn't do it. Couldn't spend my life being the person everyone expected me to be instead of who I actually was. So I ran. Owen absorbed this, fitting the pieces together. The expensive backpack, the refined way she spoke, the constant phone calls she never answered. They're looking for you. My father mostly. Preston too, probably, though I think his pride is hurt more than his heart. Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. I told myself I'd figure out what I wanted, where I belonged. Then I ended up here, in your apartment, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. She met his eyes. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I should have. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid you'd make me leave. And I wasn't ready to go. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I'm still not ready. Owen thought about all the small moments of the past few weeks. Rachel reading to Henry, her laugh when his son told bad jokes, the way she'd started leaving her sketchbooks on the coffee table instead of hiding them in her backpack, the way his apartment had started to feel like a home again instead of just a place where he and Henry existed between one day and the next. I'm not asking you to go, he said carefully. You should be. This is complicated, Owen. My family, they're not going to stop looking, and when they find me, they're going to make this difficult for everyone. Let them. The words surprised him, but he meant them. I've dealt with difficult before. I can handle it. Rachel studied his face like she was trying to memorize it. What if I can't give you what Stephanie did? What if I'm just another person who can't handle this life? Stephanie left because she wanted more than I could give her. You're here because you want less than you had. Owen took a step closer. That's not the same thing at all. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The soup on the stove bubbled quietly. From Henry's room came the soft sound of his son's breathing, steady and peaceful now that the medicine had kicked in. Everything felt balanced on the edge of something Owen couldn't name. Then Rachel reached out and took his hand, her fingers cool against his palm. I think I'm falling in love with your life, she said quietly. With the way you are with Henry, with Tuesday night dinners and homework at the kitchen table and all the small, ordinary things I never knew I wanted. Owen's throat tightened. What about me? Are you falling in love with me? Rachel's answer was to kiss him. It was gentle and hesitant, and tasted like the salt of almost tears. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. I'm terrified, she admitted. But yes. Owen kissed her again, slower this time, and let himself believe that maybe this could work, that maybe love was enough, that maybe Rachel was different from Stephanie, and this time he wouldn't end up alone. But the universe had other plans. The knock on the door came 3 days later, loud and demanding. Owen was helping Henry with a school project while Rachel made lunch. They all froze at the sound. Rachel went pale, and Owen knew before she said anything that her past had finally caught up with them. Don't answer it, she said, but her voice shook. Owen opened the door anyway. 3 people stood in the hallway, all of them looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread. The man in front was tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Owen's car. He had Rachel's eyes. Behind him stood a younger man, handsome in a calculated way, and a woman in pearls who looked like she'd never had an original thought in her life. Where is she? The older man demanded. Owen crossed his arms. Who are you looking for? Don't play games. We tracked her phone. We know Rachel is here. The man tried to look past Owen into the apartment. "Rachel, come out here. This has gone on long enough." Rachel appeared behind Owen, and he felt her hand touch his back briefly before she stepped forward. "Hello, Father." The man's expression flickered between anger and relief. "Thank God. We've been worried sick. Preston's been—" "I'm not going back." Rachel's voice was steady, but Owen could hear the fear underneath. "Not to Preston. Not to that life. I'm done." The younger man, Preston presumably, stepped forward. His smile was cold. "Rachel, sweetheart, you're being dramatic. You had cold feet. It's normal, but we've rescheduled everything. The venue, the caterer." "I don't care about the venue." Rachel's composure cracked. "I don't love you, Preston. I never did. You know that. Everyone knows that. We were just going through the motions because our parents wanted it. Love is a luxury, not a necessity." Preston said smoothly. "We're compatible. We make sense together. This—" He gestured at Owen's apartment with barely concealed disdain. "Is a fantasy. You're playing house with someone beneath your station, and when you get tired of pretending to be middle class, you'll realize what you gave up." Owen's jaw clenched, but Rachel spoke before he could. "Beneath my station? Is that what you think this is about? Status?" "Isn't it?" Rachel's father cut in. "Look at this place, Rachel. Look at what you're choosing. A carpenter in a 2-bedroom apartment. Is this really the life you want? No art studio, no gallery connections, no opportunities for your career. Just—" He waved his hand dismissively. "Poverty and obscurity. I'd rather have poverty with people who see me than wealth with people who just see what I can do for them." Rachel's voice shook, but she stood her ground. "Owen doesn't want to change me. He doesn't care about my last name or my trust fund or whether I can impress his business partners. He cares about whether I'm happy. When's the last time you asked me if I was happy, Dad?" Henry appeared in the doorway, clutching his stuffed bear. "Miss Rachel, are you leaving?" The question hung in the air. Owen saw Rachel's father notice his son for the first time, saw the calculation in his eyes. "You have a child. Of course." The older man's voice dripped with condescension. "Rachel, this man comes with responsibilities, baggage. Are you really prepared to play stepmother to someone else's son?" "Don't talk about my son like he's a problem to solve." Owen's voice was low, dangerous. "And don't talk to Rachel like she's your property. She's made her choice. You need to respect it." "Respect?" Preston laughed. "You think you can provide for her? Give her the life she deserves? You're a carpenter. She's used to—" "I'm used to being lonely," Rachel interrupted. "I'm used to having everything except the things that matter. You want to know what I do here? I make breakfast. I help a 7-year-old with his homework. I draw because I want to, not because someone's going to hang it in a gallery. I laugh. I feel like myself." Her voice broke. "I feel like I matter for who I am, not what I can do for the family name." Rachel's mother finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "Darling, you're not thinking clearly. You've had a shock. Come home for a few days, rest, and then we can talk about this reasonably." "I am being reasonable, for the first time in my life." Rachel moved to stand beside Owen. Henry immediately grabbed her hand and she held it tight. "I'm not coming back. I'm staying here. With them. And if that means you cut me off, if that means I lose the trust fund and the connections and all of it, fine. I'll figure it out. I'd rather build something real from nothing than have everything and feel empty." Preston's mask of civility finally slipped. "You're making a mistake. When this little romance falls apart and you realize what you've thrown away, don't come crawling back. I won't wait forever." "Good," Rachel said simply. "Don't wait at all. Find someone who actually wants to marry you. Someone who doesn't make you feel like you settled." Rachel's father looked at Owen, really looked at him for the first time. "You're making her give up everything. Her family, Her future. Are you prepared to live with that? Owen met the older man's stare. I'm not making her do anything. Rachel makes her own choices. That's what you never understood. She's not a chess piece to move around your board. She's a person who deserves to be happy on her own terms. Happiness is fleeting, the father said coldly. Financial security isn't. When the bills pile up and the romance fades, she'll remember that. Maybe. Owen acknowledged. Or maybe she'll look back and realize she finally found something worth more than money. Either way, it's her decision to make, not yours. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Rachel's father straightened his suit jacket. Fine. If this is your choice, Rachel, then you'll live with the consequences. Don't expect any support from the family. Not financial, not otherwise. You're on your own. I know, Rachel said quietly. I've been on my own since the day you decided who I should marry, before asking who I wanted to be. Preston shook his head. You'll regret this, both of you. He looked at Owen with undisguised contempt. She'll leave eventually. They always do when the money runs out and reality sets in. Owen didn't flinch. Then that's a risk I'm willing to take. The three visitors left, their footsteps echoing down the hallway. Owen closed the door and turned to find Rachel shaking, her arms wrapped around herself. Henry was still holding her hand, looking confused and worried. Owen pulled them both into an embrace, feeling Rachel's tears soak into his shirt. What did I just do? She whispered. What did I just give up? Everything you didn't really want, Owen said softly. And chose everything you did. But later that night, after Henry was asleep and Rachel was staring out the window at the city lights, Owen wondered if that was true. If love and good intentions were really enough to overcome the gap between their worlds. If Rachel would wake up one day and realize she'd traded her whole life for a carpenter and his 7-year-old son, and the math didn't add up. He didn't ask her these questions, but he thought them, and he suspected she did too. The next few weeks were harder than either of them had anticipated. Rachel tried to find work, real work, the kind that came with a paycheck instead of an allowance from a trust fund. She applied to art galleries, coffee shops, retail stores. Every interview ended the same way. They wanted experience she didn't have, or references she couldn't provide without calling her father. She came home each day looking more defeated, and Owen could see the weight of her choice settling onto her shoulders like a physical thing. One evening, he found her at the kitchen table surrounded by job listings, her head in her hands. I'm useless, she said without looking up. I have a degree in art history from an expensive school, and I can't even get hired to serve coffee. Owen sat down across from her. You're not useless. The system is rigged. They want people who've been working since they were 16, but they also want degrees and experience, and it's impossible. I should know how to do this. I should have learned practical skills instead of which fork to use at dinner parties. She looked up, and her eyes were red. What if Preston was right? What if I can't handle real life? You've been handling it. You're here, aren't you? You're trying. That's more than most people from your background would do. Owen reached across the table and took her hand. It's going to take time. But you'll figure it out. And in the meantime, I'm just a burden. Another expense you can't afford. You're not a burden. Henry needs you. I need... He stopped, not quite ready to finish that sentence. But Rachel heard it anyway. You need me? Her voice was soft, hopeful, and terrified in equal measure. Yeah, Owen admitted. I do. This place feels right when you're here. Whole. I didn't realize how much I was just going through the motions until you showed up and reminded me what it feels like to actually live. Rachel stood up and moved around the table to sit in his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I'm scared I'm going to let you down, that I'm going to wake up and not be strong enough to do this." Owen held her close. "Then I'll remind you why you chose this, every day if I have to." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet apartment. Outside, the city moved on without caring about their small drama. Inside, they tried to believe that love could be enough. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who'd initially been suspicious of Rachel, stopped Owen in the hallway one afternoon. "That girl of yours," the older woman said. "She's good with children. I saw her with Henry and some of the other kids from the building. Real patient, understanding." "She is," Owen agreed, wondering where this was going. "The community center down the street is looking for someone to teach art classes to kids. Part-time, but it's something. I told the director about Rachel. She wants to meet her." Mrs. Patterson handed him a business card. "Tell your girl to call them, and tell her that not everyone in this neighborhood judges people by where they came from. Some of us care more about where they're going." Owen stared at the card, feeling something loosen in his chest. "Thank you. Really. Don't thank me yet. She still has to earn it. But she strikes me as the type who will." Mrs. Patterson patted his arm. "You picked a good one. Don't let her forget why she stayed." Rachel got the job. It didn't pay much, barely enough to cover groceries some weeks. But it was hers, earned through her own talent and effort instead of handed to her because of her last name. Owen watched her prepare for her first class, nervous and excited in a way he'd never seen her before. She came home exhausted but glowing, telling him about the kids and their terrible drawings that somehow captured exactly what they were feeling. "This is it," she said one night, curled up next to him on the couch. "This is what I was supposed to be doing all along, not attending charity galas or planning weddings to men I don't love. Teaching kids that it's okay to make mistakes, that art is about expression, not perfection." Owen kissed the top of her head. "You're good at it. Henry won't stop talking about how Miss Rachel is the best art teacher in the whole world." "He's biased." "Maybe. But he's also right." Slowly, carefully, they built something that resembled a life. Rachel added more classes at the community center. She started selling small pieces at a local coffee shop, nothing that would make her rich, but enough to contribute. Owen finished his big project and got offered another one. Henry's grades improved, his smile came easier, his nightmares about his mother leaving became less frequent. They fell into routines. Tuesday movie nights, Sunday morning pancakes, Henry's bedtime stories, small traditions that tied them together. 6 months after that rainy night when Rachel had appeared in his bedroom, Owen woke up to find her side of the bed empty. His heart stopped for a second, the old fear that she'd left in the night, that it had all been temporary, before he heard sounds from the living room. He found her standing in front of an easel he didn't recognize, painting in the early morning light. The canvas showed his apartment, but softer somehow, warmer, like she was painting not what it was, but what it felt like to be there. "You're up early," he said from the doorway. Rachel turned, paint smudged on her cheek. "I got an email last night. A small gallery wants to show some of my work. Nothing fancy, just a group show. But it's a start." She set down her brush. "I should have told you sooner, but I wanted to finish this first." Owen moved closer to look at the painting. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. "This is how you see us. This is how you made me feel, like I finally found home." Rachel took his hand, and he could feel her trembling slightly. "I know we said this was temporary, that I was just staying until I figured things out. But I don't want temporary anymore, Owen. I want this. I want you and Henry and Tuesday movie nights, and the way you leave your socks on the floor, and how Henry insists on reading the same dinosaur book 17 times. I want all of it. Forever, if you'll have me." Owen pulled her close, breathing in the scent of paint and coffee and the shampoo she'd started keeping in their bathroom. "I was terrified you'd wake up and realize you'd settled, that you'd want your old life back. My old life was a prison made of money and expectations. This," she gestured at the apartment, at the painting, at them. "This is freedom. This is choosing to build something real instead of inheriting something empty." They stood there in the morning light, holding each other, and Owen let himself believe that maybe Preston had been wrong. Maybe love wasn't a luxury. Maybe it was the only thing that actually mattered. Henry found them like that 20 minutes later, painting supplies scattered around, locked in an embrace that looked like a promise. "Are you guys being gross again?" he asked, but he was grinning. Rachel laughed and reached out to pull him into the hug. "Absolutely, and you're stuck with us." "Good," Henry said simply. "I like being stuck with you." 2 weeks later, Rachel's first gallery showing opened. It was small, tucked into a corner of the arts district, showing work from 4 local artists. Rachel's section featured paintings of everyday moments: a child doing homework, a carpenter measuring wood, neighbors talking in a hallway, a family eating dinner at a cramped table. Nothing grand or dramatic, just life, painted with so much love that it transformed the ordinary into something sacred. Owen stood in front of a painting of Henry reading on the couch, Rachel beside him with her hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. The title card read, "Home." A woman next to him, expensive clothes, critical eyes, studied the piece and said to her companion, "It's pedestrian, no vision. She could have been something if she'd stayed with the Howard family, but she threw it all away for—" "What, this?" Rachel appeared at Owen's elbow, having overheard. She smiled at the woman sweetly. "For everything that matters, but thank you for your input." The woman's eyes widened with recognition. "You're Rachel Howard. My God, the stories about you, running out on Preston Ashford, cutting ties with your family, living in some tiny apartment." "All true," Rachel confirmed cheerfully. "And I've never been happier. But you could have had everything. Success, status, a real career in art." "I have a real career. I teach kids that art is about feeling, not impressing people at cocktail parties. I create work that means something to me instead of what sells at auction. And I go home to people who love me for who I am, not what I can do for them." Rachel slipped her hand into Owen's. "That's not throwing everything away. That's choosing the right everything." The woman looked between them, clearly struggling to understand. Then she moved on, shaking her head. Owen squeezed Rachel's hand. "You okay?" "More than okay. Let her think I'm crazy. Let all of them think it. I know the truth." Rachel stood on her toes and kissed him softly. "I won't say I never wonder what if. Sometimes I do. But then I come home and Henry shows me his latest drawing, and you've made dinner even though you had a long day, and we all crowd onto the couch to watch movies we've seen a dozen times. And I remember, this is what I chose. This is what I wanted all along, even when I didn't know it." The gallery show sold 3 of her paintings. It wasn't enough to quit her job at the community center, but it was a start. More importantly, it was hers, built on her own talent and hard work instead of her father's name and connections. She came home that night glowing, proud in a way Owen had never seen her before. They celebrated with Chinese takeout and cheap wine, the 3 of them sprawled on the living room floor because Henry insisted it was more fun than using the table. The boy fell asleep between them, fortune cookie crumbs on his shirt, smiling even in sleep. Rachel looked at Owen over their son's head, and that's what Henry had become, really, their son, and mouthed, "I love you." Owen mouthed it back and meant it with every part of himself that had been broken 3 years ago, and was somehow impossibly healing. 1 year after that rainy night, Rachel woke up in Owen's bed, their bed now, and found an envelope on the nightstand. Inside was a key and a note in Owen's handwriting. "You said you wanted to stay forever. I'm holding you to that." She found him in the kitchen making coffee, Henry already dressed for school and eating cereal. "What's this?" Rachel held up the key. Owen turned, looking nervous in a way that made her heart race. "I had a copy made of the apartment key, so you don't have to keep using mine. So this is officially your home too." He paused. "If you want it to be." Rachel crossed the kitchen and kissed him, long and deep, not caring that Henry made exaggerated gagging noises behind them. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "I want it to be. I want all of it. Forever. Even the part where we argue about whose turn it is to do dishes. Especially that part." Henry bounced over, inserting himself between them. "Does this mean Rachel's staying forever for real? Can she be my mom?" Owen and Rachel exchanged glances. They'd been dancing around that question for months, never quite ready to make it official. But looking at Henry's hopeful face, at Rachel's tears, at the life they'd built from nothing but stubbornness and love, Owen realized there was only one answer. "If she wants to be," he said softly. Rachel knelt down to Henry's level. "I would be honored to be your mom, if you'll have me." Henry threw his arms around her neck. "I've been calling you that in my head for months anyway. Now it's just official." They stayed like that, the three of them tangled together in their small kitchen, and Rachel thought about the night she'd run away from her wedding, how she'd grabbed a backpack and left everything behind without knowing where she was going, how she'd ended up in this apartment by accident, by mistake, by the kind of fortune that looked like disaster until you lived through it and came out the other side. She thought about Preston, probably married to someone more suitable by now, about her father, who'd made good on his promise to cut her off completely, about the life she could have had, easy, comfortable, empty. And then she looked at Owen, at Henry, at the refrigerator covered in crayon drawings and school notices and photos of them at the park, and knew she'd made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the sensible choice by anyone's standards but her own, but the right one. "I love you," she told Owen later, after Henry had gone to school and they were alone in the quiet apartment. "I love you, and I love this life, and I love that I get to choose it every single day." Owen pulled her close, his carpenter's hands gentle against her back. "Even on the hard days? When money's tight and the roof leaks and everything feels like too much?" "Especially then. Because we figure it out together. Because you don't try to fix me or change me or make me into someone more convenient. You just love me, the real me, the one who can't cook without burning something and leaves paint on the furniture and cries during cartoon movies. That's the only you I want." Owen kissed her forehead. "The real one. The one who showed up in my room soaking wet and changed everything." Rachel laughed, remembering that night. How terrified she'd been. How certain she was making a mistake. "I told you I was just staying for one night." "Worst lie you ever told. Best lie I ever told," Rachel corrected. "Because it got me in the door. And then I found reasons to stay. You and Henry gave me reasons to stay." They stood together in the morning light, in their small apartment in their working-class neighborhood, surrounded by a life built from courage and choice and love. Outside, the city moved on, full of people chasing bigger dreams and better opportunities. But inside, Owen and Rachel had everything they needed. Not everything they'd been told to want. Not everything society said success should look like. But everything that mattered. Everything that was real. Sometimes home isn't where you come from. It's where you choose to stay. where you find the courage to build something from nothing and call it yours, where you look at an ordinary life and see it for what it really is, extraordinary, simply because it's filled with people who love you for exactly who you are. Rachel had run away from a wedding to a man she didn't love. She'd run toward a choice that cost her everything she'd inherited. And in the process, she'd found something more valuable than money or status or her father's approval. She'd found home. The months that followed weren't perfect. Money was tight more often than not. The apartment was still too small. Rachel's family never reached out, never forgave, never acknowledged that maybe she'd been brave instead of foolish. There were arguments about bills and whose turn it was to do laundry, and how to handle Henry when he had nightmares. There were moments when Rachel caught herself thinking about her old life, about the ease of unlimited credit cards and someone else handling the hard parts. But there were more moments, so many more, when she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. When Henry drew her a picture at school and titled it "My Family," with 3 stick figures holding hands. When Owen came home exhausted from work but still helped with dinner because they were a team. When the 3 of them piled into Owen's beat-up truck to drive to the Free Museum Day and made a whole adventure out of parking 6 blocks away and walking in the rain. Rachel's work at the community center expanded. She added evening classes for adults, workshops on weekends, a program for kids who couldn't afford art supplies. The gallery showing led to another, then another. Nothing that made her famous or wealthy, but enough to contribute. Enough to prove that her father had been wrong when he said she'd amount to nothing without the family name. On the night of her 2nd anniversary in the apartment, 2 years since that rainy night when she'd shown up soaking wet and desperate, Owen and Henry surprised her with a cake they'd clearly made themselves. It was lopsided and the frosting was lumpy, but it had "Happy Anniversary Rachel" written in careful letters that looked like Henry's handwriting with Owen's steadying hand. "Anniversary of what?" she asked, even though she knew. "Of the day you stayed," Henry said. "You said one night, but you stayed forever. That's worth celebrating." Rachel looked at them, her family, the one she'd chosen and who'd chosen her back, and felt something settle deep in her chest. The last piece of doubt, the final whisper of "what if," went quiet. This was home. Not the apartment, though she loved it. Not the neighborhood or the city. Them. Owen and Henry, the life they'd built together from stubbornness and hope, and the kind of love that didn't need perfect circumstances to thrive. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion, "for letting me stay, for giving me a reason to." Owen pulled her close while Henry wormed his way between them, and they stood there in their small kitchen with their homemade lopsided cake. And Rachel knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice, that some things were worth more than money or status or her father's approval. Some things, like coming home to people who loved you, like watching a child grow, like building a life brick by brick with your own hands and calling it yours, were worth everything. Sometimes the best thing you can do is run. Not away from responsibility or commitment or the hard work of living, but toward the life you actually want instead of the one everyone expects you to have, toward the people who see you, really see you, and choose you anyway, toward the messy, imperfect, beautiful reality of building something real. Rachel had run toward Owen and Henry without knowing it, had stumbled into their lives by accident and stayed on purpose. And every day since, she'd made the same choice. To stay. To build. To love. To call this cramped apartment with its leaky roof and second-hand furniture home. Because home isn't about square footage or property values or having the right address. It's about the people who make you feel like you belong. The ones who see your worst and choose you anyway. The ones who make the ordinary extraordinary simply by being there. Rachel had given up everything for this, and gained everything that mattered in return. That's what Owen told her years later, when Henry was graduating high school and Rachel had her first solo gallery show, and they'd somehow made it work through all the hard times and good times and everything in between. They stood in the same small apartment. They'd never moved, never wanted to. And he said, "I knew that first night. When you said one night, I knew you were lying. Not to me, to yourself. You were already home. You just didn't know it yet." Rachel leaned into him, watching through the window as Henry loaded boxes into a car, preparing for college. Their son. The boy who'd asked if she could be his mom and made it real just by believing it. "I knew too," she admitted. "I was terrified, but I knew. This was where I was supposed to be." "Any regrets?" Rachel thought about her father, who'd never called. About Preston, who'd married someone else within the year and was presumably very happy with his practical, sensible life. About the trust fund and the art connections and the easy path she'd abandoned. Then she thought about Tuesday movie nights and Sunday pancakes and 1,000 ordinary moments that added up to a life worth living. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Because in the end, that's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but choosing love anyway. Choosing the life that makes you whole instead of the one that makes you comfortable. Choosing to stay when every logical reason says to run. Rachel had shown up in Owen's room soaking wet and said she was staying for one night. She'd lied, and that lie had saved them both. Sometimes home isn't where you come from, it's where you choose to stay. And Rachel had finally, beautifully, come home.